Welcome into the Joel Klatt Show. I am Joel Klatt, and I am glad that you are here with us. Hey, before we get into anything tonight, just make sure that you're subscribed to the show wherever you get your podcasts. And by the way, it always helps us if you rate and review us. That helps us out a little bit, so we would appreciate if you did that. You can follow the show on all the social medias at Joel Klatt Show. Okay, wherever you get your social media. If you're 13 and love TikTok, great, we're there. If you're 42 and love Facebook, I think we're there as well, but I'm not totally sure. And I think that's where you go for the generations, but that's where we're at. If you want to follow me, I'm at Joel Klatt on Twitter, at Joel_Klatt on Instagram, and everything is there. Tonight, I want to get into the recruiting rankings and maybe some more broad thoughts about recruiting. This being the signing day. I don't even know what to call it anymore. It used to be just National Signing Day. Now it's like second signing day, late signing period. What, more thoughts on that in later episodes. But I want to break down some of these numbers, and then we are going to go into the mailbag for the first time. We opened up the email, and you guys flooded us with questions. So we've got some good questions that we're going to answer at the end of the show. Make sure you stay tuned for that, including who you should and shouldn't be a fan of. So that's going to be interesting. Okay, let's dive into this really quickly. And everything in college football, as you know, has become territorial, and in particular when it comes to conferences. So what I wanted to do is right off the bat is just break down where all the top recruits in the country are going to play and what conferences that they signed with. So let's look at the 39 players that were rated 5-star recruits, the top 39 players in the country, and this is where they landed. Now, there's not going to be a total of 39 because technically Deuce Robinson has not signed. We think he's going to be at Georgia. So that number for the SEC is actually going to go up from 21 to 22, or at least we expect that. But this is what it looks like. And yeah, that's not a misprint right there. Look at what the 5-star recruits are telling us is that the best football is in the SEC, and that's where they're going to go. 21 of the 39 5-star recruits, soon to be 22, signed in the SEC. The Big 12 with 7, they came in second. The Pac-12 with 5 jumps up there. ACC with 4, and the Big 10 with 1 5-star recruit for the entire conference. That was shocking. And obviously a graphic like this, you're going to need further explanation. And the teams that jump out right away is like, wait. What did Ohio State do? What did Michigan do? Well, more on Michigan in a little bit, but I do want to sit with Ohio State for a second, because when you look at that graphic where all the 5-star recruits went, you might think that, hey, Ohio State got lapped in recruiting, and that's not quite the case. Now, listen, they didn't win the recruiting year, and that crown clearly goes to Alabama. Alabama has one of the best classes that we've seen in recruiting. Obviously, not quite what Texas A&M had as far as the total number last year, but certainly close. Like, this was a great class. They had 9 5-star recruits. So this is a team and a program that is going nowhere and will continue to get better. But Ohio State had the only 5-star recruit to sign in the entire Big Ten. And I think it begs the question of like, well, what happened? What's going on? Well, before we dive into Ohio State and their class, I do want to just throw this out there. In this day and age, isn't it becoming like obvious who the conferences and the teams that are going to engage in the NIL discussion and who aren't? And by the way, there's so many different philosophies. And so I hesitate to even bring this topic up because people are going to immediately be like, are you suggesting someone's dirty? No, not at all. I'm just suggesting that philosophically, programs around the country are approaching NIL very differently. Okay. Case in point, Michigan is a team that really doesn't want to give NIL dollars or promise NIL dollars to potential recruits. And because of that, they've seen their high school recruiting number dip. Now, what they have shown is that if you prove yourself, that they do have very lucrative NIL deals, but for guys that earn them on the field there at Michigan. Blake Corum is earning plenty of money. They also started a collective that's very unique, by the way, and one of the most unique. I don't want to say it's the only one because I don't know that for sure, but they have this collective that is basically a one more year collective. Like it's a collective that raises money to make sure that they can provide NIL deals for the players that they feel like could and should stay in school for another year. Well, that's very different than, let's say, promising an incoming freshman NIL dollars. Okay, so I think that when you at least think about the way teams, conferences are approaching NIL, it can lead to some clarity when you see a graphic that is that unbalanced, like you saw with the 5-star players. Now, let's move on to Ohio State, because Ohio State is a case study in why the 5-star, 4-star argument isn't always the best argument. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, let's start with this. There were 39 players that earned a 5-star rating. These are the best of the best. And obviously you want as many of those players as you possibly can. Those are the top players in the country. It's also should be noted that from player 40 until about player 350, or more, or 400, or even more than that, those players get 4-star ratings. So that's a huge number of players that get a 4-star rating. So let's just throw this out there. If you signed the 40th player in the country and he technically got a 4-star ranking, is that equivalent to signing the 404th top player in the country who also got a 4-star ranking? No, it's not. So stars don't always tell the story when it comes to the 4-star. So you have to dig a little bit deeper. When you really start evaluating some of these classes, what you have to do is I go at least, you can go wherever you want, but I go top 100 players. How many did you get? And then what is your average player ranking across your class? And that'll tell you kind of the depth of what goes on. So let's take a look now at individual teams and how they did in the top 100. The top 5 schools in the top 100 players are Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Ohio State, and Oklahoma. Okay, Alabama cleaned up. Obviously, they're going to clean up. They started with 9 5-star guys. Those were top 39 players in the country. They ended up getting 14 of the top 100 players in the country. That's quite a haul. It's a great class. Bama is going to be loaded. There's no doubt about it. Georgia got 12 top 100 players. Texas got 8. Ohio State 7. Oklahoma 7. Okay, so when you look at that, you start to think to yourself like, oh, okay, so it's not quite as drastic as maybe just those 5-star graphics would lead you to. And then you start to look at this. Of those 4-star players that weren't 5 stars but top 100, right? So I'm talking about player 40 to 100. There's 60 players. The team that got the most number of those players was Ohio State. They got 6 of those guys, okay, to equal those 7 top 100 recruits. So they did pretty well in there, which is why their average rating is actually pretty high. Okay, so Ohio State's average rating is actually 3rd in the country, right behind Alabama. Obviously, they're number 1. Georgia, they're number 2. And then Ohio State is right there. Them in Texas. So those 4 schools, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, and Texas, are the only schools to have an average rating of 93 or higher. Okay? So that tells a little bit more of a complete picture. So, like, did Ohio State recruit on the same level as Alabama? Close, not on the same level, but I think it tells a little bit of a different story than just looking at the 5 stars. I will say this, Alabama and Georgia killed it. There's no doubt about it. And I think some of these other schools did a heck of a job as well. When I look at those top 100 recruits, those are the guys that end up being great players, right? Like Marvin Harrison Jr. wouldn't have been included in that 5-star graphic. Well, that's just crazy because he's obviously one of the best players in the country. He's a 4-star. So when you get a player like that, it's obviously great for your for your signing class, and that is the case, obviously, for Ohio State. Just broad strokes, when you take a look at this, there were 22, I call it 22, 21 guys signed already, 5-star players, 39 total going to the SEC. If you include Oklahoma and Texas, it actually goes to 29, because Oklahoma and Texas are the only two schools that signed 5-star players from the Big 12. So OU 3, Texas with 4, those 7 Big 12 players that are 5 stars are OU and Texas. Well, in 2024, maybe beyond, they're going to be in the SEC. So the SEC cleaned up in this recruiting year. I mean, cleaned up. I keep looking at this. There were only 8 schools that got multiple 5-star players. There was only, 9 more that got single, digit 5-star recruits. South Carolina gets 1. Colorado gets 1. This is wild, the level of dominance that we're seeing on the recruiting trail. And listen, a lot of it is where the players are located, because a lot of them are from that SEC footprint, and a lot of it is just the maniacal nature with which Alabama and Georgia recruit. Because to beat each other, they've got to recruit on such a level that it dwarfs everybody else throughout the country. So that's listen, it's fascinating to me. Is this the end all be all? No. But at the same time, you better recruit well if you're going to want to play at the top end of college football. What is kind of fascinating to me is when you look at individual schools. Okay. And so when I look at individual schools, I start looking at surprises. Which teams surprised me in a good way and which teams surprised me in a bad way. I like doing it as a surprise because attaching winners and losers or grades, I think, is really dumb. I hate doing it in the NFL draft because we don't know. Like, we haven't seen these kids. We haven't seen them develop. I can give you surprises like, oh man, I thought their class would have been much higher, or they did better than maybe I expected, or maybe they turned some sort of corner in terms of what they were struggling with or who they were struggling with. And I've got some of those examples right now. So, you know me, I'm always pessimistic about things. So let me start with some of my surprises, like in maybe not the best way, right? So some of my bad surprises. Let's start with USC. USC, seeing them where they were in the recruiting rankings was jarring, to be honest with you. I look at USC and I thought, you know what, Lincoln Riley in this state should be able to have a top 5 recruiting class easy. I mean, Clay Helton was pulling in top classes. Now, not one of those last year's, but you look back through the USC recruiting rankings and it's like, it's littered with top 5 classes, even when the program wasn't doing much. And so I thought to myself, like, surely Lincoln Riley, with the momentum that he's generating, is going to be able to just open up his back door and pull in a top 5 class. And it wasn't even close. It wasn't even close. And more specific is the struggle that they had when it comes to the state of California. And when I look at what you need to do in USC is you got to put a fence around the state of California, because if you can do that, you're going to pull in a great class. And this is worrisome for me. And I know that they did a nice job in the transfer portal, and more on that in a moment. But basically, there were about 20 players in California, in the top 300 in the country, right around there, 19, 20 players in the top 300, depending on who you use as a rating system. And USC got 3 of them. That's not enough. That's not enough. They should be doing much better with those players in their own backyard. And they need to do a lot better. They did get 3 of the top 10 in the state. and the top 10 are all 100, top 150 nationally. But again, like you look at some of these other teams, Oregon comes in, gets 4 of the top 10 players. You look around the country and you've got teams coming into California like Tennessee, Miami, Texas, Florida State, Georgia, Louisville, Notre Dame. I mean, it's one thing if Oregon comes down. I kind of get it, right? It's the Pac-12. If UCLA grabs a few of them. When Stanford was rolling, maybe Stanford grabs a couple of them. Heck, even if Colorado maybe grabs one of them, right? It's like it's in the footprint. It's in the family, right? It's the Pac-12. You kind of understand it. But when you're getting poached from outside of your footprint, that is bad news. And so I'm sitting here looking at Tennessee, Miami, Texas, Florida State, Georgia, Louisville, and Notre Dame, all coming in there and poaching talent out of the Pac-12 footprint and out of California. That is not good. And then it gets even a little bit worse when you look at what this team needs desperately and then what happened in recruiting in terms of the high school players in this signing period. USC did not do well signing some of those top high school players out of their own state that were defensive players. They need defensive help. We saw it right before our eyes late in the season. I mean, how many times are we going to see a Lincoln Riley coach team play exquisite offense and lose the game? 50 points, 500 yards, and yet oh, well, they still lost the game. They have to get better on defense. And then when you look at some of the best high school players in the state, where did they go? Well, the top two, the best edge player, Oregon got him. Top 2 cornerbacks in the state, they're out. Miami got the next best defensive lineman in the state. Florida State got the best linebacker in the state. They didn't get any of the top defensive players that they needed. Those are the guys that, you got to live in those living rooms. That is your bread and butter. That is the lifeblood of the program. And so this is why I'm surprised at USC, right? Do I think that they could be okay? Yeah, they might be okay, but that's not a good omen. It's really not. My next surprise on the kind of negative side, if you will, was Michigan. Michigan landed at what? I think 18th is the last I saw. And 19th overall class, despite 2 straight playoff appearances, despite 2 straight Big Ten titles, despite 2 straight wins over their rival, the Ohio State Buckeyes. That should have translated into more momentum. And we've seen them have in their history under Harbaugh much better classes than this. So it's kind of strange. They were 3rd in the Big Ten, by the way. It's not even like they were just 2nd in the Big Ten. They were 3rd in the Big Ten. Penn State jumped up ahead of them. And then you look at the average player rating. And this is what was most alarming to me. I showed you already, Ohio State, one of 3 teams with a 93 or above, 93.6. Penn State was the 2nd in the Big Ten with an average rating of 91.1. And 3rd in the Big Ten with an average rating of 88.8 was Michigan. You're talking about almost 5 points on average below in terms of your average player rating. That one was a bit of a head scratcher to me, a bit of a head scratcher with both of those. The momentum that each of them should be having, what USC and the positive momentum that they got, the Heisman Trophy winner, Lincoln Riley. They're moving to the big, I don't understand it. I didn't understand the Michigan one either. Now, to be fair, and I want to just say this, to be fair, what I led the show with was kind of a precursor to this moment, which was you don't know exactly how each coach or collective or program or athletic department is approaching the NIL conversation with incoming recruits. And that is impacting drastically where these recruits end up. Drastically impacts that. So you've seen some teams lean more into the transfer portal because those are known commodities. I know this guy can play. I know that he can come in here and contribute and maybe fill a need. And that's where Michigan and USC have done really well, in particular over the last 2 years. These 2 classes that they each signed out of the transfer portal were really good. So I want to be fair to each of these teams, programs, coaches, all of it, recruiting departments. Was I surprised with where their high school recruiting rankings were? Yes. I thought that they were going to have more momentum. Does more go into it now than what did 2 and 3 and 4 years ago? Absolutely. Because the NIL conversation has changed dramatically. And quite frankly, we just don't know what the conversations are like between the coaches, the athletic department, all of these people, and these recruits. Because I know that there are recruits out there that walk in and they're like, yeah, nice to meet you. Okay, let's get down to business. Some coaches are turned off by that. I mean, it's impacting these recruiting rankings. There's no doubt. So Michigan and USC did a really good job in the transfer portal. When you look at the average player rating out of the transfer portal, these two teams, at least in the sites that I was on, they finished 3rd and 4th respectively in the country. USC's average player rating out of the transfer portal, 90.6. Michigan's 90.57. So they're getting themselves better. USC, 6 players on defense from the transfer portal. Michigan got good linebacker help, edge help, offensive line help, in particular on the inside where they were going to miss some guys after graduation. So these are the areas that they need help, and they're getting that through the transfer portal. Okay, so those were my surprises, maybe in the negative direction. How about pleasant surprises in the positive direction? Let me start with Penn State. Now, to be fair, Penn State didn't blow it out of the water with a top 10 class or a top 5 class or beat Ohio State in recruiting, but they did do something, and they've continued a trend now for 2 straight years that was really lacking for them in the 3 years ago, 4 years ago. They've started to own their own state. And I think that's really imperative for any program. Even if you're not going to have great players from your state, you got to get the best players from your state, in particular in the era of the transfer portal, because generally speaking, those guys that are more local, they're not going to be the ones that are going to be heading out the door right away to go back home or to, be mercenaries. So they can be cores to your team. Even if they're not the best players on your team, they can be the core to your team, the nucleus of your team. And Penn State has done a much better job over the last couple of years, and certainly this year, retaining the best players in their state. You look at Penn State in 2023, they got 3 of the top 4 out of their state, 6 of the top 10, only 1 top 100 player in the state, but they got him. Last year, they got 3 of the top 4, 6 of the top 10, including Nick Singleton, Abdul Carter. Like, these were main contributors this last year for Penn State. And it turned the tide, because they were struggling in this regard in 2021 and 2020. You look back at 2021, they didn't get any of the top 5 players in the state. All 5 were top 100 players, including Kyle McCord and Marvin Harrison. In 2020, there was only 1 player in the top 100 in the country from Pennsylvania, and they lost him that year. They lost the top player in the state each of those years, 2021 and 2020, to Ohio State in their own conference. So they've fixed that. They've gotten the top player in the state to back-to-back years, and they've started to own their state. So I thought that was a positive from Penn State's perspective. Another pleasant surprise, Oklahoma. I thought Oklahoma had a really great class, and obviously the rankings suggest that. As far as the total class in terms of recruits and transfers, number 6, their best since 2021 when Caleb Williams came in. They had the number 4 class in the country when it just looks at high school recruits. That's their best high school class since 2005. So, Brent Venables did a great job. I looked back at some of these classes that they had high school only over the last few years, and Lincoln Riley wasn't touching that. 2019, I believe they had the 6th best class in the country. They had an 8 in there, but then 10, 13, 9, 19 in 2016. So Brent Venables has done a really good job. Their first class is the best they've had in a long time. 6 of their best 7 recruits are either defensive players or offensive linemen. How do you get good? How do you win going into the SEC? You better play good defense. You better play good on the line of scrimmage. And their best player overall is their quarterback that they got, Jackson Arnold. So I loved what Oklahoma did. A couple of others that I thought were good momentum, pleasant surprises. TCU. TCU signed a heck of a class. They've also done well in the transfer portal. 22nd overall class, and this is one of those teams that like capitalizes. They had slipped a little bit in recruiting, and then they come back after this great year that they had. I had them as high school classes in 2022 as 45th, 2021 is 54th, 2020 was 23rd, 2019 was 32nd. So they jump up there and they recruited at a high level, capitalizing on the momentum of that great year there for Sonny Dykes. Another one for me was Texas Tech. I thought Joey McGuire did a heck of a job. Their class was, right up there, top 25 class, fourth in the Big 12. Joey McGuire is working it, and he's doing a great job. I like Joey McGuire a lot. I was hard on the program and the administration for firing Matt Wells when they did. I don't care if you fire Matt Wells. You can fire Matt Wells. They fired him when the team had 5 wins and some winnable games down the stretch, and they fired him. And it's like, wait, I mean, that didn't sit right with me from a student athlete's perspective. From if I'm playing there, that sours me a little bit. But they hired a great coach. I really love what Joey McGuire is doing. I loved covering them when they played TCU. And when I looked back, they were 4th in the Big 12 in recruiting. They hadn't finished higher than 7th, going back 6, 7, 8, 9 years. And when you're finishing 4th, remember, or caveat, when you're finishing 4th in the Big 12 now, that means that when Texas and Oklahoma leave, you're finishing 2nd in the Big 12. So right now they're recruiting on par with a TCU, who is owning recruiting outside of Texas and Oklahoma. So when they move, like, those are the teams that are going to be the class of the Big 12. You're looking at Texas Tech. You're looking at TCU. And I think that that's really positive. And then the last team that was surprising to me, at least, Colorado. And I know that we shouldn't be surprised because of what Deion is and what he's doing. But this was a 1-11 team. 1-11 team that just pulled in a top 30 recruiting class. That's pretty special. That is a quick turnaround. And in particular, this wasn't like a team that had been having a lot of success, then went to 1-11 and now has bounced back. Like, Colorado has not been relevant very much for 2 decades. 1 year in which they won a division, went and played for a Pac-12 title. That's it. And so for Deion to do what he's doing is pretty amazing. This guy can get in any living room in the country, and he pulls in a 5-star transfer. He pulls in a 5-star high school recruit, and that's pretty special. That's pretty special. So there you go. And I'm sure there's more. I could have done a whole show, by the way, on just Georgia and Alabama and how great that they are in recruiting, and they are. Those classes are phenomenal, and you know what? To beat them, you better either develop like crazy or get transfers in or start recruiting at the level that they're recruiting. Because until somebody does, it's going to be so difficult to beat those teams. They're just so much better than everybody else. And I'm sure we'll get into that more during the course of the season. Okay, let's dive into the mailbag. Let's have some fun with the mailbag. We opened it up last week. And before I get started on the mailbag, if you have any questions about anything, life, right, anything, you can email us. Our email is very simple, lengthy, but simple. The Joel Klatt Show mailbag at gmail.com. The Joel Klatt Show mailbag at gmail.com. And I got to tell you, my team and I had some fun and some laughs on text, just like reading through some of these questions. So please keep them coming. We'll try to answer as many as we possibly can. It's my hope, by the way, to end every episode with one of these because I think that they can be fun. All right, so let's start. Let's get to 3 of them here tonight before we get out of here. Let's start with this one from Jeff Beaufort. He says, do you think Penn State will win a national title in the next 10, 15 years? I'm 47. So I was 11 the last time my alma mater won a title. I'd like to see one more within my lifetime. So here's the hard part, Jeff, is that I would also love to see a little bit more parity. I would love to see the national championship move a little bit more than it has. Having said that, it's going to be really difficult because of the numbers that I just broke down to you. I mean, look at where all the best players in the country are going to play college football. I don't see a team being able to win a national championship unless they can average for 4 straight years a top 5 overall recruiting class. That's basically what it takes to win a national championship. Now, how the transfer portal is going to affect that, how NIL is going to affect that, heck, like how the expanded playoff is going to affect that, I'm not totally sure. Injuries are going to play way more of a factor in the future with a 12-team playoff. And the portal will continue to play a huge factor. Look at what happened this last year with TCU making the national championship. Not that TCU was ever going to beat Georgia. I mean, my goodness, after that game. But, I think that the door was basically shut before these last couple of years. And I think it's starting to slowly open. But I maintain, if you're going to play with and beat some of these teams like Alabama and Georgia and even Ohio State in your own conference, you better start averaging out over a 4-year span about a top 4, 5, 6 class in the country in order to go out and win a national championship. So I don't know, Jeff. I don't know. That's probably not great news for you, but that's what I'm going to land on. All right, let's get to some other ones. Let's go non-football here. Let's go with just some life advice. So Tanner chimes in. He says, "Hey, Joel, my son is 8 months old today. Congratulations, Tanner. Being a father is my greatest joy. And now that we are at the end of his first football season, I feel like I am faced with a dilemma. Do I saddle him with my burden of being a Michigan and Packer fan, where we are always in contention but ultimately fall short of a title? Or do I get him on board with the Chiefs and Georgia so he can grow up happy and winning titles for the next decade plus?" This is a great question, and it's like an age-old debate. Like, this brings up the question, do you have to be a fan of the team in your city? Do you have to be a fan of the team that your dad loves? I don't know. I don't know if I have a great answer to this. I will tell you a quick story, though, and then tell you the people I despise. Let's start with that. Here's a quick story. My dad, great man. Love my dad to death. He's a former Marine, fought in Vietnam, comes home, starts a family, and was a high school teacher and a high school football coach. Loved mentoring kids. And so, but he was like, he was a Marine, right? He's a Marine. And he never pushed any team on me. And we didn't have, let's just take baseball, for example. We didn't have Major League Baseball in Denver when I was growing up. So it's like you kind of had to choose a team. A lot of kids were Cubs fans because of WGN, or even Braves fans because of TBS. We got those games locally. But in 86, like, I was a young kid and the Red Sox were in the World Series, so I started rooting for the Red Sox. Well, I was rooting for the Red Sox then for the next couple of years. Then all of a sudden 1992 happens and the Rockies come to town and they're at Mile High Stadium and the Colorado Rockies are there. And I'm sitting there rooting for the Colorado Rockies one day in the stands in Mile High. My dad took me to a game and he looks at me and he's like, "So are you a Rockies fan?" And I was like, "Well, no, I'm a Red Sox fan." And he was like, "Well, then why are you rooting for the Rockies?" And I was like, I don't know. And he's like, "One team. You can be a fan of one team." And I'm like, to this day, I loved that advice because I can't stand the people that are like, "Oh yeah, like I love the Cardinals and I love the Angels and I love the Padres." And it's like, whoa. You get one team per sport. You get one team, so you got to choose wisely. I do not believe it has to be your hometown team, and I do not believe it has to be your dad's favorite team. I really don't. And Tanner, to your question, by the way, I would just suggest this. Like, you never know how the future is going to play out. You really don't, because in 1997, you were riding high with Michigan and the Packers. And so if someone was born in 1997 or 1998, you would have been like, "Man, I'm a Georgia fan and a Chiefs fan. All we've done is lose to John Elway, and Georgia can't get over the hump, and all Georgia does is lose. Man, maybe I should raise him to be, I don't know, a Michigan fan and a Packers fan, because then he'll at least win Super Bowls and national championships. You see what I mean? Like, I was born in 1982. The last thing you would want to do in 1982 is become a Georgia fan and a Chiefs fan. Watching all those Marty Schottenheimer teams lose to John Elway and the Denver Broncos, I loved it because I was a Bronco fan. I loved it. But you get what I'm saying. This has to be cyclical. Now, for your sake, Tanner, do I hope that your son becomes a fan of the teams that you root for? Yes. You know why? Because then it's a family. And that's what I love about sports, is that it brings families together. So my hope is that he picks those teams for you, for him, and for your future's sake. But does he have to? No, he doesn't. But one team per sport. One team per sport. Last question. Let's do one more and get out of here. All right, let's see. Patrick says, hey, Joel, great podcast. Thank you, Patrick. A question about your notebooks. Do you have both football/work and personal notes in the same notebook? I'm sorry. Did Patrick just ask me that? I mean, what type of heathen keeps their work notes and personal notes in the same notebook? You can't double dip like that. Like, nobody takes a bite of a chip and dips it back in the salsa. Patrick. I mean, like, do I even have to show you? They're right here at my disposal. My football. We've been over this, right? I've got all these and the spares. I've got my blue Bic pen right here in my holder. But folks, like, you don't dare write a personal note in a work notebook. Were you born in a barn? I've got my personal notebook right here. See, I got my little personal notebook here, and those are little to-do lists. And you know what? Actually, I shouldn't even say personal. That is like my work to-do list. It's like my I don't even know what you call it. My to-do list notebook, and just like a doodle notebook. And then I've got like my personal journal here. And yes, I do journal. I spend time every single morning. I love to read the Bible, journal, pray, and I write them down. Just like that. So yeah, this notebook is different than my work notebook, different size, different paper. Sharing notes in a notebook. What are we doing? What are we doing? Tune in next Monday, new Joel Klatt show. I've got some thoughts on the calendar in college football, why it is ruining college football coaches, and what we need to do to fix it. I've got the fix coming up next Monday on a brand new edition of the Joel Klatt Show. Thank you for listening, everybody.